On the 4th of February 1971, the most famous engineering company in the world went bankrupt. Not a subsidiary, not a division, not a joint venture that had been quietly wound down. Rolls-Royce itself. The company that built the Merlin engine. The company whose name was a synonym for the best that money could buy, filed for receivership and told the government it could not pay its bills. The company owed more money than it had, and the reason it owed more money than it had was a single engine. The engine was called the RB211, and it was supposed to be the most advanced turbofan in the world. By the time it bankrupted the company that was building it, that claim was probably true. It was also, at that moment, irrelevant, because the most advanced turbofan in the world is worthless if the company that makes it no longer exists. This is the story of how one engine contract nearly destroyed Rolls-Royce and what the British government did about it in 72 hours. To understand the scale of what was lost that morning, you need to know what Rolls-Royce was in 1971. It was not just a car company. The cars were the public face, but the business was engines, jet engines, marine turbines, industrial power units. Rolls-Royce powered 80% of the world's long-haul airline fleet. Its military engines were in the combat aircraft of more than 20 nations. The company employed over 80,000 people across its sites in Derby, Bristol, Glasgow, and a network of smaller facilities. When the receivership was announced, the shock in Derby was physical. People stopped in the street. The factory gates closed at lunchtime. A city that depended on a single employer understood immediately what bankruptcy meant for the mortgage, the school fees, and the car on the drive. The contract was with Lockheed, the American aircraft manufacturer, which was building a new wide-body airliner called the TriStar. The TriStar needed 3 engines, and Lockheed had chosen the RB211 over competing designs from General Electric and Pratt & Whitney. That decision was a triumph for Rolls-Royce. It was the first time a British engine had been selected for a major American civil aircraft program, and the order was enormous. Initial contracts called for more than 500 engines, with options for hundreds more. At the prices Rolls-Royce had quoted, the program would be worth billions of pounds over its lifetime. The problem was the price Rolls-Royce had quoted. In order to win the contract against 2 American competitors, the company had bid aggressively. How aggressively became clear only later, when the development costs began to exceed every estimate the company had made. The RB211 was not an evolution of an existing engine. It was a new design, and Rolls-Royce had committed to technical goals that had never been achieved: a 3-shaft architecture, a new compressor, and most critically, fan blades made from a carbon fiber composite called HYFIL. The HYFIL blades were the gamble. Carbon fiber was lighter than titanium and potentially stronger, and lighter fan blades meant a lighter engine, which meant less fuel, which meant a more attractive aircraft. Rolls-Royce had been developing HYFIL for years and believed it was ready for production. It was not. The blades failed bird strike tests. Genau, tests! A frozen chicken fired into a running engine at the velocity. A bird would hit at takeoff, shattered the composite blades in a way that titanium blades could survive. The entire fan blade program had to be restarted in titanium, which was heavier, which changed the weight of the engine, which changed the performance guarantees, which triggered penalty clauses in the Lockheed contract. Every month of delay added cost, every redesign added cost, every penalty clause triggered by a missed milestone added cost. The contract with Lockheed was a fixed-price deal, which meant that Rolls-Royce bore the entire risk of development overruns. If the engine cost twice as much to develop as planned, Rolls-Royce absorbed the difference because the price Lockheed had agreed to pay did not change. That structure had seemed manageable when the estimates were £65 million. When the estimates passed £100 million and kept climbing, the fixed price became a trap with no exit. By late 1970, the development budget had more than doubled, and the company's cash reserves were gone. Rolls-Royce had borrowed against future revenues that were now further away and smaller than the original projections, and the banks were no longer willing to lend. The auditors qualified the accounts. Yes! The share price, which had been above £4 at the time the Lockheed contract was signed, fell below £1 and kept falling. The board went to the government on a Thursday evening, and the conversation that followed was one of the most consequential in post-war British industrial policy. Edward Heath's Conservative government had been in office for less than a year, and Heath had come to power on a platform of not rescuing failing companies. The phrase used at the time was that there would be no more lame ducks. The state would not prop up businesses that could not survive on their own. That was the policy, and it lasted until the most famous engineering company in Britain knocked on the door. The government had 72 hours to decide. If Rolls-Royce went into liquidation rather than receivership, the RB211 program would die, the Lockheed contract would collapse, and Britain would lose its only major presence in the civil aero engine market to General Electric and Pratt & Whitney. The defense implications were equally serious. Rolls-Royce built engines for the Harrier, the Phantom, the Nimrod, and the nuclear submarines. Letting those production lines collapse was not a decision the Ministry of Defense was prepared to accept. There was also the matter of Lockheed itself. Lockheed had bet the TriStar on the RB211. Nah! If the engine program died, the TriStar died with it, and Lockheed was already in deep financial trouble from military cost overruns on the C-5 Galaxy transport aircraft. An American aerospace company collapsing because a British engine maker had gone bust would create a diplomatic incident of the first order, and the Nixon administration made it clear to London that it expected the engine program to continue. On the 6th of February, 2 days after the receivership was announced, the government nationalized the aero engine and marine divisions of Rolls-Royce. The nationalization was done under emergency powers without a parliamentary vote, and the speed of it reflected the scale of what was at stake. The car division, the part that made the Silver Shadow and the Corniche, the part that most people thought of when they heard the name Rolls-Royce, was separated and sold off. It eventually became a private company and is now owned by BMW. The split created two companies where there had been one. The aero engine side kept the Derby factories, the military contracts, and the RB211 program. The car side, which was profitable but small, kept the crew factory and the right to put the Spirit of Ecstasy on its bonnets. The workers in Derby kept their jobs. The shareholders of the old company lost everything. The shares were suspended at 64 pence, and the receivership meant there was nothing left after the creditors were paid. The nationalized aero engine company continued the RB211 program with government money replacing the private capital that had run out. The titanium fan blades worked. The engine passed its certification tests. Aye! It went into service on the Lockheed TriStar in 1972, and over the following decades, the RB211 family became one of the most successful engine programs in aviation history. Its descendants power the Boeing 747, the 757, the 757, the 767, and a range of wide-body aircraft that between them carry hundreds of millions of passengers every year. The irony of the carbon fiber is worth noting. Rolls-Royce was right about the principle. Carbon fiber fan blades are now standard in the most advanced jet engines in the world. The technology that bankrupted the company in 1971 was simply ahead of the materials science that could deliver it. The frozen chicken that shattered the HYFIL blades would not shatter the composite blades that Rolls-Royce and its competitors build today, because 50 years of development solved the problem that Rolls-Royce tried to solve in 5. Rolls-Royce was returned to private ownership in 1987 when the Thatcher government privatized it. The share offering was heavily oversubscribed. The company that had been bankrupt 16 years earlier was sold to the public for £1.5 billion, and the government kept a golden share that gave it a veto over any foreign takeover. That golden share was eventually struck down by the European Court of Justice, but by then Rolls-Royce had become so integrated into the defense infrastructure of Britain and its allies that any hostile bid would face obstacles that no court could remove. The RB211 cost Rolls-Royce its independence, cost the taxpayer hundreds of millions of pounds, cost Edward Heath his reputation as a man who would not bail out industry, and cost the shareholders of the old Rolls-Royce company everything they had. But it worked. The engine that bankrupted the company that built it went on to become the foundation of a business that is now worth tens of billions of pounds and employs 50,000 people. That is the full accounting of the RB211, and it is an unusual one because almost every number in it points in 2 directions at once. The development budget was £65 million when the Lockheed contract was signed. It was north of £170 million by the time the company went under. The government spent a further sum, never fully disclosed, completing the program and keeping the workforce together. And the engine, the actual engine that caused all of this, sits today in aviation museums as one of the great achievements of British engineering, which it is. It is also a receipt for the price of being wrong about a carbon fiber fan blade, and for the question that every government eventually has to answer: how much are you prepared to pay to keep a name that matters? The answer in February 1971 was whatever it costs. The government wrote the check, the engine flew, and the name survived. Whether that was good policy or bad policy depends on whether you think a country can afford to lose a capability that took 50 years to build. The men in Derby who kept their jobs and the pensioners who still draw from the Rolls-Royce scheme have one answer. The shareholders who lost everything have another. And a frozen chicken fired at 600 miles an hour into a set of carbon fiber blades that were not ready sits somewhere between the two.